August 3, 1943, near San Stefano, Sicily. The air is thick, a paste of dust, heat, and the coppery scent of antiseptic. Men lie on cots in rows under canvas. The sounds are low, murmured pain, the shuffle of orderlies, the distant, dull thump of artillery that never quite stops. This is the 15th Evacuation Hospital. A figure blocks the light at the tent entrance, polished boots, jodhpurs, a pistol belt with ivory-handled revolvers. General George S. Patton. He moves down the line. He stops before each wounded man. His voice is surprisingly soft. He pins a purple heart to a pillow. He calls them brave boys. He is, in this moment, the fatherly commander. Then he reaches cot number 12. A young soldier sits shaking. Private Charles H. Cool, an artilleryman from Indiana. His skin is pale. His eyes are fixed on nothing. There is no bandage, no visible wound. The general's posture changes. His voice drops. It loses its softness. "What's the matter with you?" The soldier's voice is a whisper. "It's my nerves, sir. I can't stand the shelling." A beat of silence in the humming tent. Patton's face darkens. It is a storm crossing a familiar terrain. "Your nerves," the words are low, dangerous. "You are a goddamned coward." He slaps Cool across the face with his gloves. "You hear me, a yellow bastard." He grabs the shaking soldier by his collar. He shoves him toward the tent exit. He turns to the stunned medical officers, his voice a snarl. "Don't admit this son of a bitch. I won't have hospitals cluttered with these cowards." The tent is frozen. The moment hangs, poisonous and complete. It is not an isolated burst of temper. It is a diagnostic event, a fracture in the carefully maintained legend of old blood and guts, and in 1 week he will do it again. This is the beginning of the Sicilian Scandal, not a battle, but a breakdown, an event that would force the Supreme Allied Commander to make an impossible choice, lose his most aggressive general, or betray the very values his army claimed to fight for. To understand the explosion in the tent, one must understand the pressure cooker that was George S. Patton in the summer of 1943. He was 57 years old, a man who believed fervently in reincarnation, convinced he had been a warrior in countless past lives. His entire identity was armor, the polished boots, the flamboyant speech, the relentless, profane aggression. He cultivated the persona of a modern Cromwell, a divine instrument of warfare. And he had just been given his moment. After leading the successful, though chaotic, Operation Torch landings in North Africa, Patton was given command of the U.S. 7th Army for the invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky. His mission, to storm ashore at Gela, secure the beachhead, and then drive north and west alongside the British 8th Army under General Bernard Montgomery. The campaign began with triumph on July 10, 1943, but it quickly soured. The terrain was a nightmare of jagged mountains and narrow roads, perfect for German delaying actions. His rival, Montgomery, convinced Allied command to shift the main axis of advance, effectively sidelining Patton's planned drive and funneling American forces into a supporting, defensive role. For Patton, this was an insult. It was stagnation. It was a denial of his destiny. His blood was up. The campaign became a personal race for glory. He pushed his men mercilessly, demanding impossible speeds, berating any commander he deemed slow. He famously declared he would make his men so proud to be here that they would be afraid to go home and have the folks know they hadn't been in the front lines. The pressure was not just operational. It was deeply personal. He saw the war as his final, destined act. Failure, or even mere mediocrity, was a spiritual damnation. Every delay, every bureaucratic slight from higher command, every mile of difficult terrain was a personal affront. The rage was always there, simmering beneath the polished surface. The hospital tent was simply where the lid blew off. The other figure in the tent was Private Charles Cool. His diagnosis, exhaustion, a clinical euphemism for what the Army called battle fatigue or psychoneurosis. In 1943, military psychiatry was in its infancy. The old stigma of shell shock from World War I lingered, often conflated with cowardice or a weak character. Treatment was rudimentary, a few days of rest, sedatives, and an expectation to return to the line. The concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as a legitimate, treatable injury was decades away. Cool was a soldier in the famed and battered 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. This division had borne the brunt of the fighting in North Africa at Kasserine Pass and El Ghetta. They had landed at Gela in Sicily facing German panzer counterattacks. They were exhausted, physically and psychologically. The human machine had a breaking point, and medical officers were seeing it daily. The field hospital was a liminal space. It was not the rear, the war was still audible. It was a place for the body's broken machinery, but it was also, for a moment, a sanctuary from the relentless moral and psychological demands of combat. When Patton entered, he crossed from one world into another. He brought with him the uncompromising black and white morality of the battlefield: kill or be killed, advance or fail, courage or cowardice. He had no framework for the grey, shattered landscape of a psychological wound. In his worldview, a man shaking without a physical cause was not ill. He was broken. And for Patton, a broken tool was a contemptible thing. This fundamental clash between the general's medieval code of warrior virtue and the modern reality of industrialized warfare's psychological toll was what made the incident inevitable. The hospital tent was a collision zone, and Private Cool was simply the man in the way. The scandal bears Patton's name, but it began with two men whose stories were almost erased. Private Charles H. Cool was a 23-year-old from Mishawaka, Indiana. Before the war, he worked in a factory. He was not a career soldier, but a citizen called to duty. He had been in the 1st Infantry Division through North Africa and into Sicily. The medical ledger for August 2, 1943, notes his admission, diagnosis, psychoneurosis. He had a low-grade fever, later determined to be malaria, compounding his extreme exhaustion. When Patton struck him, Cool later recalled, "I thought he was going to kill me. He was not a coward, he was a spent shell." 1 week later, on August 10, the scene repeated with Private Paul G. Bennett. A 21-year-old from South Carolina, Bennett was a veteran of 4 campaigns, Tunisia, Sicily, and more. He was a radio operator, a critical and stressful role. His comrades described him as a solid, reliable soldier, but after days of constant shelling, the tremors began. He couldn't stop shaking. He told the doctor, "I can't take it anymore." When Patton encountered him, Bennett's suffering was visible and profound. Patton saw malingering. Medicine saw collapse. These two young men were, in fact, early and severe casualties of a war that consumed minds as readily as bodies. Their treatment after the incidents was a quiet tragedy. They were returned to duty, Cool after a brief stay in a psychiatric ward, Bennett back to his unit. Bennett would later be killed in action in Germany in March 1945. Cool survived the war, carrying the memory privately, telling family only that the general was under a lot of pressure. They were not characters in Patton's story, they were human cost. Patton's leadership was not a mystery, it was a deliberate, terrifying engine. He believed absolute, unflinching aggression was the sole path to victory and the only way to save lives in the long run. Hesitation was cowardice. Compassion on the battlefield was a luxury that got men killed. "We're not going to just shoot the sons of bitches," he famously told his men. "We're going to rip out their living goddamned guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks." This philosophy made him phenomenally effective. It also made him dangerously brittle. The slapping incidents were not an aberration from his leadership style. They were its pure, unfiltered essence applied to the wrong context. In the field, he bullied and inspired his commanders to move faster, to push harder. In the hospital, he applied the same brutal psychology to a sick soldier. It was a catastrophic category error. His own psychological state was a factor. Patton was a manic force. He wrote poetry, believed in destiny, and suffered from profound mood swings. The pressure of Sicily, the rivalry with Montgomery, the frustrating terrain, the fear of being sidelined had him at a fever pitch. The hospital was where his warrior persona, his personal demons, and the immense stress of command converged into a single, violent outburst. He was not just disciplining a soldier. He was raging against the very concept of human limitation, a limitation he saw as a personal betrayal in his sacred quest for glory. The U.S. Army in 1943 was a massive, evolving machine. It had regulations, medical protocols, and codes of justice. By every written standard, Patton's actions were a court-martial offense, assault, conduct unbecoming an officer, cruelty. But institutions in wartime operate on a different calculus. The report of the incident, written by the 15th Evacuation Hospital's commanding officer, Colonel Donald E. Currier, moved swiftly up the chain. It bypassed Patton's own 7th Army headquarters and went directly to the headquarters of Allied forces. This was a deliberate maneuver. The medical corps was horrified and knew Patton's own staff might bury it. The report landed on the desk of the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Ike now held the dilemma in his hands. He was a master of coalition warfare, a political general who understood morale, publicity, and the fragility of alliances. He saw the facts clearly. His most famous combat general had committed a brutal, stupid act. Twice. Eisenhower's options were stark. Court-martial Patton, lose his most aggressive field commander, create a massive propaganda gift for the Nazis, and shatter the aura of American moral superiority. Or find a way to salvage him. The institution faced a choice between its own rules and its desperate need for a weapon that worked. The path it chose would define the limits of acceptable brutality in the pursuit of victory. World War II was fought with cameras as well as tanks. Public morale on the home front was a strategic asset. The image of the American soldier, the brave, clean-cut GI fighting for freedom, was a powerful tool against the Nazi ideology of brute force. Patton was a star in this narrative, the flamboyant commander with the ivory pistols, the jaw set in determination. He was Life magazine material. The slapping incidents threatened to atomize this carefully constructed image. They revealed an American general acting with the very cruelty the Allies condemned in their enemies. If the story broke, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels would have a field day. It would confirm Axis narratives about American hypocrisy and weakness. It would devastate the families of soldiers and undermine trust in military leadership. Crucially, war correspondents learned of the story almost immediately. In an extraordinary moment of collective discretion or institutional pressure, they agreed not to file it. The commander of the 7th Army's press camp, Colonel Jack Redding, along with Eisenhower's staff, persuaded them that publishing it would damage the war effort and endanger lives. The press embargo held for now. This was censorship not by flat, but by consensus, proving that in total war, even the free press could decide some truths were too dangerous to tell. The scandal was contained within the military organism, a ticking bomb wrapped in silence. The first incident on August 3 was not a fleeting gesture. It was a sustained, theatrical eruption of contempt. After slapping Private Cool and throwing him from the tent, Patton turned his fury on the medical staff. He demanded to know who had admitted such a coward. He threatened to issue an order that no patient could be treated for battle fatigue without his personal approval. He stood in the center of the tent, a vortex of rage, before finally storming out. The shock among the doctors and nurses was profound, but the professional code of the medical corps held. Colonel Donald Currier, the hospital commander, wrote a detailed, factual report. He did not send it through Patton's chain of command. He sent it directly to the Surgeon General of the Allied force, who routed it straight to Eisenhower's headquarters in Algiers. The system, for a moment, worked to bypass the perpetrator's authority. 1 week later, on August 10, at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital near Sant'Agata, history repeated itself with a darker intensity. Private Paul Bennett was sitting on a stool, shivering. When Patton approached, Bennett began to cry. "It's my nerves," he sobbed. "I can't stand the shelling anymore." Patton's response was chillingly methodical. "Your nerves? Hell, you are just a goddamned coward. You shame the army. You should be shot." This time he did not just slap. He drew his famous, ivory-handled revolver from its holster. He waved it in Bennett's face. The click of the hammer being cocked was audible. He screamed that he should kill the soldier there, and then He then slapped Bennett so hard the soldier's helmet liner was knocked from his head. As he left, he turned to the admitting officer and barked, "Don't admit this man. There's nothing the matter with him. I won't have the hospitals cluttered up with these sons of bitches who haven't got the guts to fight." The pattern was confirmed. This was not a one-time loss of control. It was a policy enacted by a general upon his most vulnerable men. The second report joined the first on Eisenhower's desk. The time for observation was over. The time for decision had arrived. In Algiers, Dwight Eisenhower read the reports in stunned silence. This was the gravest crisis of his command to date, not a military setback, but a moral one. He confided in his diary, stating Patton had committed actions which may easily have made him liable to trial by general court-martial. The legal path was clear, but Eisenhower was not just a judge. He was a commander responsible for millions of lives and the fate of a coalition. He saw the brutal arithmetic. Patton was, without question, the U.S. Army's most accomplished and aggressive practitioner of mobile armored warfare. The planned invasion of Northern Europe, the cross-channel attack that would decide the war, was coming. Eisenhower knew he would need audacity, speed, and relentless drive to break out of the beaches and defeat the German army in France. Patton possessed those qualities in a way no other American general did. To lose him would be a strategic blow of the first order. Yet to ignore the crimes would corrupt the army from within. It would tell every soldier that the high command valued victory over justice, that the powerful were above the law. It would devastate the morale of the medical corps and break the trust of the ranks. Eisenhower made his choice. He would not court-martial Patton. He would attempt to salvage him. But the salvage operation would be severe, humiliating, and conditional. He ordered Patton to fly from Sicily to Algiers immediately. He then drafted a letter that was not a reprimand, but a career obituary waiting to be signed. He wrote to Patton, "I must so seriously question your good judgment and your self-discipline as to raise serious doubt in my mind as to your future usefulness." He ordered Patton to apologize personally to every individual involved, and then to apologize en masse to every division in the 7th Army. The message was unequivocal. You are on the thinnest possible ice. Your future hangs by my thread alone. The turning point was not the slap. It was the moment Eisenhower chose the weapon over the rulebook, gambling that Patton's future value outweighed his present villainy. The scandal was now contained, but the poison was still in the system. Patton arrived in Algiers on August 20, 1943, a supplicant, not a conqueror. The meeting with Eisenhower was private, blunt, and utterly devastating to Patton's pride. Eisenhower laid out the facts. His behavior was indefensible, criminal, and had endangered the entire moral authority of the Allied cause. He handed Patton the letter of reprimand, a document so severe it was essentially a suspended death sentence for his career. Patton, chastened, wrote in his diary, "I am having a hell of a time." For a man who lived by the code of the warrior aristocrat, this was a profound humiliation, but the true punishment was yet to be administered. Eisenhower's orders were explicit and deliberately degrading. Patton was to perform a ritual of public contrition. First, he tracked down Private Cool and Private Bennett. The meetings were short, awkward. He mumbled apologies to the shaken soldiers. There is no record of what was said, only that it was done. Then came the true ordeal. He was ordered to stand before the men of his own 7th Army, division by division, regiment by regiment, and apologize. He stood on rough platforms before thousands of hardened infantrymen, artillerymen, and tank crews. He removed the godlike mask of old blood and guts. His speeches were uncharacteristically subdued. He told the assembled troops he was sorry for his loss of temper, that he was trying to do his best for them, that he hoped they would understand. The reaction from the ranks was a complex mixture of respect, skepticism, and silent judgment. Concurrently, Eisenhower executed a political masterstroke. He leaked a sanitized version of the events and the reprimand to key war correspondents. The story that emerged in the U.S. press weeks later was carefully managed. Patton had been sternly disciplined for a minor incident. The great general had made a small human error and been corrected. The volcanic truth was buried. The cover-up was now official policy. For his next act, Eisenhower removed Patton from the spotlight. When the 7th Army was disbanded after Sicily, Patton was left without a command. He was sent to a quiet villa in Palermo, Sicily, with a skeleton staff. For months, he was a general without an army. He toured ancient battlefields, wrote letters, and festered. He was, in every operational sense, purged. The weapon was placed back in its cabinet, its future use uncertain. The scandal was contained, but Patton's war, it seemed, was over. Patton's exile lasted from September 1943 until January 1944. He was a ghost at the planning tables for D-Day. He feared he would miss the invasion of Europe entirely. His salvation arrived not from his own penance, but from the enemy. On December 16, 1944, Hitler launched the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. The German assault shattered American lines. Bastogne was surrounded. The Allied High Command was in crisis. In this moment of panic, one general's flaws became irrelevant. Only his qualities mattered. Eisenhower needed someone who could move an entire army in impossible conditions, attack without hesitation, and radiate absolute aggression. He needed Patton. The phone call was brief. Eisenhower asked how long it would take Patton to disengage his Third Army from its fight in the Saar, pivot 90 degrees north, and attack the German flank. Patton, who had anticipated the call, replied, "As soon as you're through with me." He had already drafted the movement orders. In a staggering logistical feat, Patton turned the Third Army north and drove it through ice and snow to relieve Bastogne in just 3 days. It was the performance of a lifetime. The slapping general was now the savior of Bastogne. The scandal was officially buried under the snows of the Ardennes and the weight of this monumental achievement. Yet the shadow remained. For the soldiers, Paul Bennett was returned to duty and killed in action in Germany in 1945, a fact that privately haunted Patton. Charles Cool fought through the rest of the war and carried the memory quietly until his death in 1971. For the Army, the incident forced a painful, if quiet, re-evaluation of psychiatric care. It highlighted, at the highest levels, the reality of combat stress. While change was slow, the event was a catalyst. For Patton himself, he was never truly trusted by the high command again. He was given a field command, but kept on a shorter leash. His post-war comments criticizing denazification and seemingly agitating for war with the Soviets led to his final removal from command of the Third Army. The instability revealed in Sicily was the crack that never healed. The scandal did not end his career on the spot, but it created a permanent conditional clause in his service. It proved he was both indispensable and intolerable. He was the flawed instrument that had to be used, but could never be fully embraced. His redemption in the Bulge was real, but it was a redemption that cemented his legend as a battlefield commander, not as a leader beyond reproach. The shadow of those 2 soldiers in the Sicilian hospital tents followed him all the way to his grave in Luxembourg in 1945. The story of the Sicilian Scandal is not a simple parable of right and wrong. It is the story of a crack in the marble. We build statues to our wartime heroes. We polish them to a high sheen, courage, determination, flawless resolve. George S. Patton's statue was the shiniest of them all. Old blood and guts, the divine wind of American armored warfare. But marble is brittle, and under immense pressure it fractures. The events of August 1943 revealed the flaw in the stone, not just in the man, but in the brutal mathematics of total war. Eisenhower's choice was not between justice and injustice. It was between 2 different kinds of cost. The cost of principle, losing your most lethal weapon on the eve of the final, decisive campaign, and the cost of pragmatism, betraying the Army's core covenant with its soldiers to keep that weapon in the fight. He chose the weapon. History, focused on the victory he helped secure, has largely vindicated his calculus, but the crack remains. The scandal forces uncomfortable questions that echo beyond 1943. What is the true price of victory? How much cruelty in a commander can be excused by competence? When does the necessity of winning a war begin to corrode the values for which it is fought. Patton himself became the walking embodiment of this paradox. He was the man whose very instability, his manic drive, his contempt for weakness, made him uniquely capable of performing the miracle at Bastogne. The same qualities that produced the villain in the hospital tent produced the hero in the Ardennes snow. He could not be one without the other. In the end, the story belongs not to the general, but to the two trembling soldiers, Charles Cool and Paul Bennett. They are the human anchors in this saga of command and consequence. They remind us that history is made not only on maps with sweeping arrows, but in small, quiet spaces of suffering. Their ordeal forced the high command to look, however briefly, at the hidden machinery of war, the breaking point of the human mind. The Sicilian Scandal was buried, covered over by the rush of events and the glory of the victory that followed, but it was never erased. It remains the permanent fissure in the legend, a reminder that even our greatest stone idols are, in the end, just stone, and stone can break.